In the spring of 2003, the public health measures put in place across China to fight back against the SARS epidemic were starting to be relaxed. While the measures weren't as harsh and restrictive as what would take place during another public health crisis many years later, they'd still seriously disrupted people's lives. In the northeastern province Liaoning, the public health measures enacted would help solve a string of violent crimes that happened in the city of Jinzhou. In the evening of May 3rd, a woman referred to with the pseudonym Tang Mo was returning home to her 6th-floor apartment having finished work. As she walked up the stairs to her apartment, she saw a man standing on the 5th floor, smoking a cigarette while looking out of the stairwell's window. Feeling a little uncomfortable, Tang Mo hesitated going up the stairs, but the man didn't turn around to look at her or even acknowledge her presence, so she continued to her apartment. 2 hours later, sitting in the living room alone watching television, Tang Mo sensed movement on her balcony. A little unnerved, she went to investigate and was suddenly attacked by a masked male intruder. Before the man could get a good grip on Tang Mo, she managed to get to the door of the apartment and open it. The intruder caught up and attempted to drag the terrified woman back into the home. Tang Mo continued fighting, and in the struggle she and the intruder fell to the floor outside the apartment. Tang Mo began screaming for help, and the intruder gave up, bolting lightly down the stairwell and out of the building. Investigating the scene, police found footprints belonging to the intruder on the woman's balcony, and went on to find what appeared to be matching footprints close to the stairwell's 5th-floor window, where Tang Mo saw the man earlier. The police surmised that the intruder climbed from the 5th floor to the balcony's open window. However, with the man wearing a mask, Tang Mo could only give police a basic physical description of the intruder, but strongly believed the person was the same man she saw smoking in the stairwell. She described him as being around 1.7 meters tall, estimated his age as being mid-30s, and said he smelled strongly of alcohol. The building in immediate area didn't have security cameras, and with little more than footprints to go on, the investigation went nowhere. 15 days later, on the evening of May 18th, a woman referred to with the pseudonym Jiang Mo was sleeping in her 6th-floor apartment when she was woken suddenly by someone pinching her nose and placing their hand on her throat. Looking up, she managed to make out the figure of a masked man looking down on her, and she screamed out in terror as the intruder attempted to smother her. The screams woke her teen son sleeping in the neighboring room, and he came running to help his mother. A struggle between the son and intruder ensued, the masked man soon retreating to the apartment's front door to escape. Before he managed to get out, the son pulled the intruder's mask off, but didn't get an opportunity to look at the man's face as he moved swiftly down the stairs. Bizarrely, as the intruder disappeared down the stairwell, he said thank you to the teen boy. When police arrived to investigate the scene, again they found that the intruder had entered the apartment from the balcony, this time climbing down from the roof of the building. They again managed to get footprints belonging to the suspect, but this time also had the mask. The mask was homemade, and appeared to have been produced using material cut from a rucksack. When asking Jiang Mo and her son to describe the man, they both gave physical descriptions which closely matched that of the suspect responsible for the May 3rd home invasion. Having the mask gave police hair samples, but it couldn't help until they had a suspect in custody, so with little other evidence, once again the investigation stalled.
你好，我报警啊，我父母呢现在今天自杀了，10个月了。什么时间自杀的？这个我不太清楚，因为我今天我上班，我只是现在有死屋了。对的，屋里。
On May 26th, as the officers were still investigating the 2 home invasions, police received a call from a teen boy saying he found his stepmother lying dead in their home. The victim, 50-year-old Liu Hongmei, was found naked under a quilt in her 6th-floor apartment after having the life choked out of her. The autopsy later showed that the perpetrator squeezed so tight the victim had suffered fractures to the bones in her neck. Investigators found no evidence that Liu Hongmei fought back against the intruder, suggesting she was attacked while she slept. It appeared that the victim's clothes were removed post-mortem, and there were several cuts to the victim's legs and genitals, which again were inflicted after Liu Hongmei passed. Closer examination of the body showed that despite being found naked, there was no evidence to suggest the victim was violated. Strangely, lying on the bed next to the victim, there were 2 hands of playing cards dealt out. The playing cards suggested there was more than one intruder, but other evidence found seemed to contradict this. As with the previous home invasions, footprints were found that didn't belong to any residents of the apartment, but only one set. As bizarre as it sounded, police could only come to the conclusion that the perpetrator dealt the cards to himself and Liu Hongmei, the absence of her fingerprints on the cards suggesting it happened after her death. No other fingerprints being found on the cards suggested the intruder wore gloves during the home invasion. It appeared the suspect spent time rummaging around the apartment, but according to family members of the victim, nothing notable was missing. Police suspected that the man responsible for the 2 prior home invasions was the same person who ended the life of Liu Hongmei, but this time the mode of entry into the apartment was different. Damage to the apartment's door pointed to the intruder forcing his way inside, rather than entering through a window. The connection between the crimes was confirmed when later analysis of the footprints matched with those at the other scenes. However, with little new evidence, and neighbors saying they didn't see anyone suspicious in the area prior to the crime, the police had no help with identifying possible suspects. Feeling that the man was likely to strike again, police set about finding him the hard way, going door to door around the city, but with 90,000 people residing in Jinzhou, it was a massive task. Unfortunately, police suspicions that the man would try to claim another victim proved to be correct, only 5 days later. On May 31st, a man identified with the pseudonym Yimo went to the 6th-floor apartment his wife rented, after she failed to answer his calls. His wife, Zhang Xiaohong, was a middle school teacher and renting the apartment to reside in during the week as it was close to her school. Entering the 6th-floor apartment, Yimo immediately recognized something was wrong. The room was strangely quiet, and calling out his wife's name was met with no response. Going to the bedroom, he saw his wife's lifeless body on the bed, hidden under a pile of quilts. Once police arrived to investigate, they found a strange but familiar scene. Under the quilts, Zhang Xiaohong was naked, apart from wearing silk pantyhose and high-heel shoes. She'd received multiple knife wounds to the neck, and there were several cuts found on the victim's genitals. However, there were no signs the victim had been violated. Further examination of the body saw investigators discover that an uncommon Chinese character had been cut into the back of the victim, Zhang Xiaohong. The crime scene bore similarities to the previous incident, and suggested the perpetrator spent an extended period of time in the apartment. On the bed next to the body there were several empty beer bottles, and various food items, including half-eaten apples, and mirroring the previous scene, 2 hands of playing cards were dealt out. Once again there were signs that the suspect rummaged around the apartment, but according to family members nothing appeared to be missing from the scene. There was no sign of forced entry, and footprints found suggested the intruder entered through the balcony, climbing from a window in the stairwell on the 5th floor. The Chinese character found on the victim's back wasn't immediately recognized by the investigation team. It's generally accepted that there are more than 100,000 characters in the Chinese language, with around 11,000 being viewed as commonly used. With the perpetrator carving the especially unusual character onto the victim, the investigation team felt it must have some significance. Unable to recognize the character, the police needed assistance, and contacted a Liaoning University professor of Chinese to help them identify it. To qualify to teach the Chinese language in schools, teachers need to have full command of various numbers of characters depending on the level. Primary school Chinese teachers need to know between 4,000 and 5,000 characters, with the number rising to 6,500 for middle school teachers, and between 8,000 and 10,000 for those teaching high school and university students. When the professor was brought in, he too couldn't immediately identify the character, so began doing some research. Eventually he discovered the character in the Kangxi Dictionary, a record of the Chinese language compiled during the reign of Kangxi, the Qing dynasty emperor who ruled between the years 1662 and 1722. The character was pronounced Miao or Mao, but due to the different dialects it had different meanings depending on which area of the country it was spoken. In the Central Plains region, it had a similar meaning to concubine, while in northeastern dialects it was perhaps closest to meaning beauty. However, in the southern Minnan dialects, spoken in provinces such as Fujian, the character meant prostitute. With the level of violence displayed in the 2 homicides, police believed the suspect was likely using the southern meaning of the word, suggesting he wasn't native to Liaoning. With the investigation team already looking at people living in Jinzhou with criminal records, they now focused on looking at residents who migrated from the southeastern region of the country, but they'd soon be distracted by another case. On June 13th, police were called to another 6th-floor apartment. A 45-year-old woman had been found dead in her home. The victim Yu Zongxian was discovered by her sister after a strange and concerning phone call. The sister's call was answered by a man who spoke with a southern accent and claimed he and the victim were doing business in Siping City in the neighboring Jilin province, 400 kilometers to the northeast of Jinzhou. The man abruptly cut off the call when the sister demanded to speak with Yu Zongxian, and her attempts to call again went unanswered. After repeated calls were rejected, she decided to visit the apartment Yu Zongxian rented and look for her sister. Yu Zongxian had moved into the apartment which belonged to a friend the month prior, recently having officially divorced her husband after many years of them being separated, her ex-husband living on the island province Hainan, 3,000 kilometers away to the south. The sister found Yu Zongxian lying face down on the bed, naked and lifeless. After being examined, the cause of death was ascribed to blunt force trauma, the victim suffering multiple blows to the head from what was believed to be a hammer. Once again, despite the body being found naked, there was no sign that the victim was violated, and on this occasion, there were no other marks on the body. Furthermore, there were no obvious signs that the perpetrator spent much time in the apartment after ending the victim's life as there were in the 2 previous homicides. The differences in the modus operandi did have investigators questioning if they may be looking for someone else for this incident, but footprint evidence made it clear the same man was responsible. The suspect had entered the room through a window, climbing to it from the 5th-floor stairwell, something which was now a calling card for the perpetrator. However, this time with the phone having been taken from the room, the investigation team now had their first genuine opportunity to track down the man responsible. During the preliminary examination of the body, medical examiners concluded the victim died several days prior to the discovery. The sister's call had been answered on June 12th, and the body was found the day after. The last time anyone had seen Yu Zongxian alive was in the evening of June 11th, when she was out playing mahjong with friends. When being interviewed, neighbors stated they'd heard the victim return home around 9 p.m. on June 11th, and no one had seen or heard from her since then. Officers began going through call records for the missing phone, and found 9 calls had been made or received after June 11th, the date the evidence pointed to the homicide taking place. The investigation team started attempting to track down the people on the other end of those calls. One woman who was a friend of the victim stated that she called the phone on the morning of the 13th. However, while the person answering didn't speak, she heard the unmistakable sound of a moving train. Further investigation found that when that particular call was answered, the phone was close to the city of Shenyang, 230 kilometers to the northwest of Jinzhou. Looking at train timetables for June 13th, police were able to identify the train the potential suspect boarded as being the K641. Despite the easing of restrictions, the recent public health measures still being enforced to tackle the SARS epidemic helped police narrow down the list of possible suspects. While many of the measures put in place to fight the virus at the time had been greatly relaxed, passengers on public transport having to register their names on a health check card remained. This allowed the investigation team to get the exact number of passengers on the train at the time the call was received. A total of 257 passengers were on board when the train terminated in Shenyang, with 139 boarding at the train station in Jinzhou. Of those 139, 75 were male and 64 female, allowing officers to shorten the list of possible suspects. More people were eliminated from suspicion based on age, and the investigation team began hunting the remaining names on the list, with assistance from their counterparts in Shenyang. Officers from the Jinzhou investigation team made the trip to Shenyang and looked around the area the phone was last used, where they got a lucky break. A short walk from Shenyang train station, officers noticed a second-hand cell phone store, and with the phone now being shut down, on a hunch they went to speak to the owner. They asked if anyone had recently sold or tried to sell him a cell phone, giving the man the make and model. The shop owner confirmed he recently purchased the phone, which was still in the shop. He remembered the seller entered the store twice, leaving the first time unhappy with the offer for the phone, but returned a few minutes later to accept it. The physical description of the suspect given by the store owner matched the descriptions police already had, but the owner added that the man had a strange habit of often saying thank you when it wasn't necessary. For the officers, this brought to mind the statement from the son of Jiang Mo, who told police that after forcing the intruder out of the apartment, the man said thank you. Having seen the man's face, the store owner described the individual to a police sketch artist, giving the investigation team an image of the suspect. In the following days, the investigation team managed to gradually eliminate more names from the list of suspects, eventually leaving them with 13 possibilities. However, when the men were interviewed, they each had alibis for the times the crimes took place. Frustrated and sure the man they were looking for must be among the 13 names, the investigation team decided to interview the men again, this time at the police station, with a little added pressure. They took what in China is an unusual step to sweat the suspects, giving them a polygraph exam. Once the 13 men arrived at the police station, one man in particular immediately stood out. 40-year-old Xu Guizhu bore a striking resemblance to the sketch of the suspect police got from the cell phone store owner in Shenyang. He matched the height and physical build of the suspect and had a criminal record. Xu Guizhu had already been interviewed, managing to slip through the net, so with him closely resembling the police sketch and matching the physical description, the investigation team looked into how. The previous time police spoke with him, he'd recently undergone dental surgery to extract an infected tooth. The dental work left him with significant swelling to the face, which along with him being clean-shaven and his hair styled differently, it led officers to believe it wasn't the same man. Furthermore, he had an alibi for his whereabouts for each of the 5 home invasions. His wife told interviewing officers that her husband never went out at night, and was home with her on the dates in question. Now in the room ready to take the polygraph, police were certain he was the man responsible, and they had evidence that could potentially prove it beyond doubt. DNA testing was fairly new to China, and wasn't widely available to most police forces at the time. However, Liaoning province just happened to be the home of the country's leading DNA analysis laboratory, located in Shenyang, just 230 kilometers from Jinzhou. In the home invasion of Jiang Mo, when her teen son scuffled with the intruder, he'd pulled off the man's mask, which left police with hair samples from the suspect. Comparison samples were taken from the 13 men set to take the polygraph examination and sent to the lab for analysis. They also took footprints from each suspect to check against the footprints police had from the various crime scenes, which saw the foot size of Xu Guizhu matching the evidence. The investigation team were aware that evidence from lie detector tests was unreliable, but were hoping the results would pressure the guilty party into confessing. Xu Guizhu performed notably poorly during the test, his results suggesting deception multiple times, as he strongly denied having anything to do with the crimes. The polygraph results and footprint evidence gave the investigators reason to detain Xu Guizhu, and officers began looking into his background while waiting for the DNA testing results. Native to Liaoning, Xu Guizhu displayed a talent for art during his childhood, but growing up in a poor family meant he wasn't given the opportunity to develop it, being forced to leave education after middle school. He went on to join the military, serving for 4 years before being demobilized and taking a job working on the railways. While the work was hard, for many people it was an especially desirable job. Jobs with state enterprises were referred to with the term 铁饭碗, meaning iron rice bowl. Iron rice bowl jobs came with higher salaries, significantly more benefits, and weren't easy for people to get. The time Xu Guizhu spent in the military helped him get pushed to the front of the queue of people wanting the job. Despite this, he was unhappy with the work and salary, and had bigger ambitions which saw him turn to crime. In 1980 he received a 3-year prison sentence for theft, and only 1 year after being released he once again got caught stealing, this time being sentenced to 9 years in prison. During his second time incarcerated he became close friends with an inmate from Zhejiang province, just over 1,500 kilometers to the south of Liaoning. The man from Zhejiang taught Xu Guizhu some of his local dialect, with which Xu Guizhu became quite proficient, even developing the ability to convincingly mimic the southeastern accent. After leaving the army, Xu Guizhu married and had a son, but during his second stint in jail the wife filed for and was granted a divorce, something he wouldn't discover until his release. Along with his marriage ending, thanks to the second criminal conviction, he also lost his job. However, after being released he appeared to have turned over a new leaf. He eventually found a new wife in Jinzhou, with whom he had a second son, and made an honest living selling his paintings and calligraphy, which included old Kangxi characters. To the people who knew him he was a solid, reliable family man, with nothing to suggest he had a dark side to his personality. Ultimately, the DNA test came back as a match, but when the evidence was put to him, Xu Guizhu refused to confess. It was only when police informed his wife about the evidence against him, and she recanted her alibi admitting she lied, would he finally admit guilt. Frustratingly for the investigation team, Xu Guizhu initially refused to give them any motive for his crimes, only telling them how he selected his targets and his methods. He'd go out alone most evenings and wander the streets aimlessly until spotting a woman walking by herself. Following them to their homes, he'd try to see which floor of the buildings they resided, and watch the apartments to see whether they lived alone or not. Many of the residential buildings in the area of the city he was active were only 6 floors high, and those apartments on the higher floors rarely had safety bars over the windows. Furthermore, the people living on the 6th floor didn't give much thought to leaving their windows open, especially during the spring and summer months. With him still being physically fit from his days in the military, he felt entering the apartments through the windows was easier and safer than breaking in, as it would make less noise. When asked about what he did at the crime scenes, he was initially less forthcoming. He refused to say why there were hands of playing cards dealt out at the scene, and gave no explanation for the old Chinese character found carved into Zhang Xiaohong. He even took offense at the suggestion from the interrogating officers that there was a perverted motivation for his crimes, saying he had no interest in violating any of the victims. Officers asked if that was the case, why did he feel the need to strip his 3 homicide victims naked? Xu Guizhu replied that it was just out of curiosity. He wanted to stand back, take in the scene and look at them. After days of the police trying to get the motive for his crimes, Xu Guizhu grew tired of answering the same questions over and over, and told officers they would never be able to understand or guess why he did what he did. Eventually the investigation team had to throw in the towel and bring the interrogations to an end. They had the confession and physical evidence, so charged Xu Guizhu with 3 counts of intentional homicide, along with several other lesser charges. On November 25, 2003, Xu Guizhu appeared before the court to hear his sentence, and received the death penalty for the 3 intentional homicides. While he waited for the punishment to be carried out, he spoke with psychologists keen to get a better understanding of the motivation behind his actions. Some of the interviews would be shown on television, but his answers gave people little more insight into why he ended the lives of 3 people. He told the doctors that what he did wasn't impulsive, and that he thought about it for a long time before acting. He blamed his behavior in a small part on alcohol, saying he needed to drink before each homicide and that gave him the courage to act. He further claimed that if he didn't drink alcohol then no one would have died. Any questions about his motives were met with silence and shrugs, and there wasn't anything else that really delved into his psychology. Just prior to his execution, Xu Guizhu was visited by members of the investigation team one final time, the officers hoping now his own life was going to end, he may come clean about his motives, and the more unusual aspects of his crimes. This time, Xu Guizhu finally opened up, and spoke about why he did what he did. He told the officers that there was no real significance in the character found on Zhang Xiaohong, saying it was just an impulsive, intrusive thought, describing it as a bit of fun. When asked the reason he ended the lives of each victim in different ways, he said he just wanted to experiment, and find out the most interesting and effective method. He went on to explain that after ending the lives of both Liu Hongmei and Zhang Xiaohong, he stripped them naked, sat them up, grabbed some food and drinks, then for the next few hours, pretended to talk and play cards with them. Because of his wife leaving him and taking his son during his second incarceration, he developed a strong hatred towards certain types of women, and the victims in each of the home invasions all shared different characteristics with the ex-wife. While he played cards and spoke to the deceased women, he vented the anger and bitterness he felt about the woman who left him. The officers asked if the anger he felt was the reason for the cuts to the victim's genitals and legs, but Xu Guizhu denied that was the case. Instead, he claimed it was more down to his artistic expression, and went on to explain he saw the homicides as works of art that he didn't put on paper or canvas. Towards the end of December 2003, Xu Guizhu finally faced his punishment, and was executed for the homicides of Liu Hongmei, Zhang Xiaohong, and Yu Zongxian. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, leaving a comment, and subscribing to the channel. And hope to see you again for the next dark tale from the Middle Kingdom.